Welcome to a ride on the outside. MMA is full of people on the inside, but what about the ones that watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with Tom Albano and Zain Bando on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
All right, here we are, episode number 96 of the MMA Outsiders. All aboard the Dricus Du Plessis hype train! I am so happy. I thought it was a good fight. Look, and I like Izzy too, but man, just seeing, you know my story, Zain, about Dricus. Just following him since UFC Africa in 2016 and seeing him go all the way to here. I mean, it's incredible. We'll talk all about Dricus. We'll talk all about
I gotta eat crow, Tom. I'm sorry. I was wrong again.
We'll talk everything UFC 305 today. Dricus and Kai Kara France. We'll talk about PFL Hollywood, the rest of the UFC schedule, Ariel Helwani. We do have to start with something else, but you know what? I really don't want to talk about it, but we have to talk about it. But let's just get through all this first. Let's get through our business first. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you get notified of everything here at the Empty the Bench Network. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/ETB Network. We just passed 830 subscribers, so help us get to 1,000. Thank you all for your support. We never, ever take it for granted. And of course, you can listen to the MMA Outsiders wherever you get your podcasts, Acast, Spotify, Apple, all of that. If you don't want to see our ugly mugs, make sure to follow us across social media. By the way, MMA Outsiders ETB, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok. Do the same for the ETB Network at ETB Network. And Zain, I would be remiss that I did not mention that the MMA Outsiders and everything here at the Empty the Bench Podcast Network is presented by Playback. Watching sports is more fun with others, but we spend too much of our time watching alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can stream live sports together with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, and invite viewers up for Q&A. Playback makes watching sports fully interactive and a social experience. From playing fantasy sports, repping your favorite players and teams, and watching with the commentators and communities you care about. Win or lose, sports are best enjoyed together. Join our community by going to playback.tv/ETB Network to find out more, including our live stream schedule. We've got football content coming up. Dan and Tony just did a WWE Raw stream last night. They're going to do one for SmackDown. They'll do another Raw SmackDown doubleheader next week. We have our fantasy football live stream. We're basically going to do an 8-team draft. That'll be Thursday the 29th, I think. Time's still to be finalized, but that'll be hella fun. Football time's coming here on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network, so we're going to have to share the space with football.
For sure, both for college and for NFL, so it should be very exciting.
Yeah. Before we get into UFC 305, though, unfortunately, it's time for a Conor McGregor update. I think I already said my piece, Zain, the night that basically this news piece went out after Dana White's comments following week 1 of Dana White Contender Series. He basically claimed that Conor McGregor will not fight this year. And I let out what I needed to let out. Conor puts out a tweet and says, tell him, everybody, we need to get everybody on social media. We need to flood Dana's social media and say, we want December. All caps being Conor as he normally is. And Conor and Chandler keep posting all these updates across social media in the days since. Conor saying, the UFC wants me for December. Chandler saying, hey, Chandler, I don't know. I know Nick Morgeson, my co-host on ETV Sports, had met him at the Fanatics Fest in New York on, I think it was Friday. He said he did ask him about Conor. I don't know if he ever gave a clear answer, but it seems like Chandler, this whole time, he still wants Conor.
I think he kept it very simple when he spoke to Nick. He goes, "I just want to fight. I'm ready to fight." That was his answer.
Okay, then guess you want? I'll be blunt. We're not even 5 minutes into our recordings, and I'll be blunt. If he wants to fight right away, he has to move off Conor. At this point, that if that's what he wants, he has to move off Conor because I if you saw well, you know how I feel, but if anybody out there saw my live stream I did after Tough Enough last week and responding to this, look,
you went crazy.
Yeah, and then I'll say it again. If Dana is saying this, that's it. I promised it after the injury. I do not care anymore for this fight. I just simply don't. How many more times are we going to do this? Michael Chandler has now wasted 2 years of his UFC career. Conor McGregor just continues to be a constant tease. I know Zain recorded before a whole thing about Tough, but Tough 31 was just a freaking joke now. Like this, it's pathetic. I'm sorry. I don't really give a rat's ass anymore about this fight because I'm tired of waiting.
I'm gonna have to respectfully disagree with you. This is a wonderful theater. This is what makes me smile every couple of days. Still seeing these two go at it, still teasing a fight because I think I honestly think at the end of the day, if it makes the most money possible, it's going to make the most sense for the UFC. And the UFC knows, and you mentioned several times, the UFC knows that they need Conor more than Conor needs them. And if they keep
that's the other thing. Sorry, Zain. But I know Dana's talking about, we can create new stars, and people are talking about, the contender series system, changing out the roster every year.
The inactivity era, Tom.
What happened?
It's the inactivity era for most of the champions right now.
Right. So if anybody wants to come after me and say you're ridiculous thinking the UFC needs Conor McGregor, I'm sorry. This news story, Zain, I think that kills anything. They need him a lot more than Conor needs them because
Absolutely.
Conor and Brett and Anthony were talking about it in last week's Puncher's Chance. If Conor wanted, he can just go over to freaking Bare Knuckle and do a fight there, and that would draw millions.
Of course he could. He's got Conor McGregor. He can do and get out of anything. It doesn't matter what the contract stipulations are. He's the only guy that could probably do it because of who he is. He has leverage. All of these other champions and big stars don't, and it's simply because he has a liking to the UFC that no other fighter has ever had. So they feel like and I've never said this publicly, but I'm just going to say it now. They gave up after 2016. They essentially gave up after they realized, oh shit, we screwed up by pulling him off of UFC 200 because he didn't do our mandatory media obligations. Once that happened, they quickly realized that they can't control what he does.
Yes, the only thing I will say about that, if that's the case, Zain, why wasn't he on UFC 300?
I think it was a business decision because they probably thought UFC 300 is a number it could sell no matter what because it's 300.
Understood, but they've now screwed themselves again, basically.
That's true. They tried for 300, didn't work. Tried for 303, didn't work. 306 at the Spirit, that was a pipe dream that never happened, and now we're looking at UFC 310, but essentially not even having the fight either.
Right. So I will believe it, Zain. I will believe they fight when I see Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler in the octagon. It can be day of the ceremonial weigh-ins and they're shoving each other. I'm not going to believe it until they're actually fighting. Now,
so wait a minute. So you won't believe it as they're making the walk to the octagon? I still
won't believe it. I won't believe it. I won't believe it till the cage door closes. Now, I've lost all faith. That's why I'm saying. But Zain, if what you're saying is what he told Nick about, I just want to fight. If he wants to fight September, October, so he doesn't have to, then he's got to move off Conor. That's what it's at this point.
But I think he's also realizing too that I don't know him because I'm not in his head, but there's also the other side of where he's like, I don't want to look back 40 years from now and say, shoot, I missed out on the biggest payday of my career because it was my fault when it clearly isn't his fault.
Right, but it clearly isn't his fault. This is the UFC, like you said, Sam. The UFC has created a monster in Conor McGregor that it no longer has control over. Well, has not had control over since 2016.
Right. I mean, think about it. I'm not trying to be an idiot towards any Conor McGregor fans. I'm technically one of them. But could you imagine if the stuff with him and Khabib happened to any other two UFC fighters? The repercussions would have been super different. They would have
been kicked out and banned from the UFC for life, basically.
100%.
So, and the only thing, Zan, the only reason that, I still may have a desire for 310 for McGregor Chandler is because now that McGregor Chandler is off, I guess we'll put it that way, the new rumored UFC 310 main event is Belal Muhammad taking on Shavkat Rakhmonov. And I don't want to be disrespectful to Belal because I know you love Belal and Belal just pulled off a big upset, but that
even I know this.
That does not scream pay-per-view main event. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, it doesn't. And it's no disrespect to either of those guys, but Shavkat is yet to prove that he can sell pay-per-views. And if we're being completely honest, and if we're being 100%, go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
If we're being 100% honest, UFC 304 was pulled on the backs literally of Tom Aspinall and Leon Edwards, not Belal Muhammad. There's a reason. There's a reason why that fight was in the UK and not in the United States, and it doesn't take rocket science to figure that one out. So,
Zan, I know Shavkat is dangerous, and I like Shavkat, and I think he can be the champion. And I know Dana wants the belt off of Belal, but can we be real? This means that Shavkat Rakhmonov is getting a title shot off a win over Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. And I love Wonderboy, but the Wonderboy of 2024 is not the Wonderboy of 2016.
And it's the same Wonderboy that hasn't won 3 fights in a row in 3.5 years.
It's the welterweight division is in such shambles right now that I mean, look, but Zan, once again, it's I don't know if I want to say it's Sydney all over again, but it's UFC scheduling all over again. They made all those sacrifices for 300 that 301 didn't look great. They like we said, the Sydney situation last year, which you and I talked about ad nauseum last week because it was Dricus versus Israel. Literally. And now, instead of taking my advice in getting Alex Pereira ready for a potential fight with 310 against Magomed Ankalaev, the Ankalaev hate runs through and they book him for 308 and they put Pereira in a title fight at 307 against Khalil Rountree, which we'll talk about in a little while. Like, once again, these guys just don't know how to schedule anything. And they continue to put all of their eggs for 310 in a Conor McGregor-shaped basket, knowing that is dangling by like a rope and some glue and tape that's holding that thing together.
Tom, do you believe in the conspiracy theory that they're doing all of this just to piss you off even more?
Maybe.
Jeez, man. So I had to ask you this week. I'm going to keep asking you every week until it's officially off. Your percentage meter of these two stepping in the cage. What is it? What is it this week?
Hold on. I feel like I need one of those, what do they call those devices where you're, putting it on the ground trying to find it? What is it?
An air tag, basically.
And no, I'm talking about one of those devices where like you're on the beach and you're trying to find something in the sand.
Oh, I don't remember the official name.
Because that's where my percentage is. It's somewhere down there. It's somewhere down below the earth.
Jeez. I'm gonna be a little more generous and say it's 10%, but there is no new poster, there is no new promo, so it's gonna stay at 10% for at least the next several weeks and maybe forever, and it'll probably go to 0 once it's officially canceled. So yeah. I'm just gonna say this. Anybody hoping to go to UFC 310, it might be good to book their rooms now because right now there's been barely any fights announced for the card. So if you're looking to save some money, now might be a good time to look into flights and hotels.
And then you'll really save. Sorry, Zain, but then you'll really save some money if it's Bilal versus Shavkat headlining that card.
That's true, and you might actually be able to sell the tickets for a bargain and make some money off of it.
All right, let's talk about 305. Dricus Du Plessis, my man, retains the championship against Israel Adesanya in a fight that, Zain, I'll be very honest, was very even, I thought, heading into that fourth round, because I could see a 2-1 either way. I know a lot of people had it 1-1 heading into round 3. I thought round 2 was a very clear Dricus Du Plessis round, using his grappling, nearly getting the choke a few times. Round 1, I think I had for Izzy. Round 3 was a little up in the air. Actually, I want to double check and make sure, because, I know I gave 1 round to Izzy, but I forget if it was round 1 or round 3. I think it was round 1 I gave.
Are you checking, or do you know that for sure? Okay.
It is round 1.
Okay, I had Izzy. Let's see, I had Izzy winning round 1. But I do think you could justify 2-1 for DDP, though.
Yes. I think it could have been 2-1 either way. But really, Zain, the finishing sequence is what people are talking about, and that's Israel Adesanya. He said in a post-fight interview wasn't intentionally trying to do it, but it looked like the Max Holloway, let's throw down. And DDP caught him.
He gets submitted 40 seconds later. It's insane.
Yeah, DDP caught him, got to his back, and this time sunk in the choke and got the tap, which I think that's the first time Israel's lost by submission.
Yes, it's the first time he's been submitted in his 27-fight MMA career. Yeah.
So, look, I know people are talking about...
it's the first time he's been submitted in the UFC, too. So
I know people are talking about, Dricus has such a weird style. His punches are so awkward. Talking about his gas tank or the nasal surgery, and just so awkward and everything. Guess what? He's winning fights. He's the champion, and now he has a defense under him. He beat the guy who reigned over the division for years, since 2019. So
yeah, it's almost like, to use a football analogy, you probably know it because you're a little bit on the older side than me, but think about how many times the Eagles beat the Bucks, and in the 2002 NFC Championship game, the Bucks got the last laugh, went to the Super Bowl, and beat the Raiders. I understand that these two have only fought between each other once, but these two had been in the shadows against one another for a couple of years, and the fight finally happened. So,
look, is it going to get to the point where everybody is going to replicate Dricus Du Plessis style, like
probably
Dominic
not.
Cruz? No, like Dominic Cruz eventually. I'll talk about commentary a little bit, because the commentary for this pay-per-view made me want to throw up. But what also equally wanted me to throw up was watching the post-fight show on ESPN Plus while I was finishing stuff up, and Dean Thomas ripping Israel Adesanya to shreds, talking about a lack of defense and everything. Look, was it the cleanest fight he fought? No. Does Israel take shots when he doesn't need to? His defense, one of his weakness? Yeah. But I don't think he fought a bad fight. I thought it was a very even fight.
No, I don't think he had a bad fight. And you could argue that if that fight doesn't go to the ground, he was tagging DDP pretty good, to where if he got in a few more punches, the fight could have turned the totally opposite way, and we could be talking about him potentially getting his belt back. So
yeah. And honestly, it kind of stinks because he put in a good performance, but he's been away for a year now. He's lost 2 straight. He's 4-4 in his last 8. Israel is just not going to get another title shot. But the question
that's a bold take. See, that's
wait. Immediately. He's not getting one immediately. He's 4-4 in his last 8.
Thank you for clarifying, because I bet you a lot of you would have taken the other way and said, "Wait a minute, no way."
No, He's not getting it immediately, though, Zan. He's 4-4 in his last 8. He's lost to Strickland. He's lost to Du Plessis, and those two are fighting next for the title because that's what Dana White says. So Izzy, at this point, I think he's got to get another fight in. He's got to win another fight before he can get a title shot again, whether it be a rematch with Strickland or a rematch with DDP. The only question is,
or a potential fight between the loser of Whitaker and Chimaev, assuming the fight happens.
Okay. Brett Okamoto actually did his post, matchmaker things on ESPN very recently. I think the day we're recording this. He thinks if Chimaev wins against Whitaker, that Izzy should fight Chimaev.
Makes sense. And you're fighting back-to-back former middleweight champions to show that you're ready for a potential title shot. To me, that makes logical sense. So,
and I think if Izzy wins that fight, then you have an argument that Izzy could get a rematch, because now the trouble is going to come, Zan, if Whitaker beats Chimaev, because we're talking all these wins that Chimaev has. I think Whitaker could be making a case for one last title shot against the DDP Strickland winner.
Oh, I think that's a no-brainer.
I think if Whitaker beats Chimaev, Izzy's
that's going
to damage Izzy.
That's what I think too. So it's almost like now Adesanya is on the outside looking in. Well, these other two fights play out. It was almost a similar situation to what DDP was in, as he was waiting for his eventual title shot, which he obviously got and won and defended it for the first time on Saturday. So the middleweight division, if you want to call it musical chairs, I think that's the perfect way to describe it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. He's got to wait for these two fights to play out. And in the case of one of them, the one that's going to play out first, if the wrong person wins, then when I just said he needs one win for another title, it might turn into 2 wins. Because if Whitaker wins, like I said, then it may be more time for Izzy to wait, unless Izzy's willing to try light heavyweight again and move up.
Or he's willing to wait for the winner of a fight that we're going to briefly preview this weekend in the main event of UFC Vegas 96. You never know.
But Zan, since we're talking about that, things could get a little interesting. So earlier in the week, Dana basically, in his genius, in his Jon Jones is the greatest fighter of all time moments, said, hell no, I'm not letting Jon Jones versus Alex Pereira happen. So what does Alex Pereira do? Well, after DDP wins, he puts a video out on Instagram and says, hey, you know what? I might drop down to 185 and fight Dricus.
Yeah, this man is turning into the most active UFC champion in a year span that I've ever seen in my life. This is insane.
And as much as the prospect of Pereira going back down to middleweight, intrigues me. I'm like, baby, come on. What about the dream of heavyweight? What about the dream of being a 3-division UFC champion?
I think Pereira's just going with the flow. He's like, I'll fight whoever, whenever, on 3 weeks' notice, 5 days' notice, a couple hours' notice.
Hey, he was a double champ in Glory. He could be a double champ in UFC. And what's unique is that he's dropping down. Every time in MMA, I shouldn't say almost every time in MMA, we usually see the champ going for double champ status moving up. The only time in the UFC I can think of in which the champion who was looking for double champ status moved down was when Dillashaw fought Cejudo. And it was the first time that it was an unsuccessful attempt.
Right. I mean, you want to talk about just madness. Like, if he moves down and wins the middleweight title again, we're going to be talking about him as one of the greatest fighters of all time in any era of mixed martial arts. I mean, if he wins the middleweight title twice in this particular scenario, that is the stuff of legends that I don't think any fighter with less than 20 UFC fights can ever replicate again, which makes it even more astonishing. Could you imagine, Tom, if he didn't have his gory rivalry with Adesanya? He would not be as highly touted amongst the crazy fan base of combat sports in the UFC and he is. I think that rivalry pushed him to next level status, and he's taken it and he used his rocket ship, and now it's in overdrive. So
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, that's why I've been advocating, for Pereira for December, because I feel like Pereira, like we talked about Zain after 303, he is a superstar now. He is at a point where we consider him a UFC superstar. People will purchase the pay-per-views. People will flock to want to see Alex Pereira fight. So we will get that, and we will talk about Pereira after we finish the recaps. But yeah, if he moves down and he beats, and even better, he even beats Dricus Du Plessis, the middleweight title scene that we just talked about, yeah, it's in complete shambles at that point.
Tom, just to quickly divert, you correctly predicted DDP beating Israel Adesanya, but you finished the overall night with a 500 record. Considering that you've essentially kicked my ass the entire year, does it feel humbling to finish 500, or were you happy that you finished 6-6 because your guy won in the main event?
I'll take being 6-6 if Dricus wins. So.
As someone who sat here and was 4-8 and who absolutely just picked up the main card and threw it like a piece of paper and only won 1 out of 5 fights, I kind of wish I was you right now. But that's why there's next week, right?
Yeah, there's still a few months left, but let's get through the rest of the main card. Well, the stuff that we want to talk about: Kai France, knockout of Steve Erceg in one round.
We both got this one wrong.
I know.
Yeah.
No, Erceg Zain, like we said, like I mentioned last week, he was a few minutes away. Had he not had some bad IQ in the 5th round against Pantoja, he would have been flyweight champion. So, Kai France, I called him the bridesmaid, never the bride. Well, I think he's
the bride, I think.
Yeah, I think he may have just earned himself a title shot after this performance. I was talking all this time about maybe Tyra if he votes Royval. Kai France just said, yeah, screw that. He probably said, F that. Title shot, please.
Yeah, I'm just going to go on a limb and say this. I think KKF will be the UFC flyweight champion by the middle of 2025. I think he sold me. Yeah, I think if you stand with KKF, considering that he has 13 finishes, which is very, very underrated and something that people don't give him enough credit for, it's bad news for the champion from Brazil, who, by the way, is a very good ground specialist. But man, if this fight happens and this fight stays on the feet, bad news if you're thinking about potentially the flyweight champion defending his belt successfully, because Pantoja would have to weather the craziest early storm in flyweight history, because it'll probably end up being a 1-8 if those two fight and it stays on the feet. So I'm excited for it. I think if the fight happens, obviously, I just think that Erceg had a bad night. He got caught. I'm sure he had a wonderful game plan going in. Mm-hmm. I'm sure the part of it was thrown out the window a little bit, and you're going to get caught and things are going to happen. Hopefully he goes back to the drawing board. I don't want to see him fight for the remainder of the year. I think he needs at least 7 to 8 months off just to clear his head a little bit. He's still one of the best flyweights in the world. But yeah, I mean, sometimes you got to get humbled, and this was definitely a humbling experience for Erceg, considering that, there was a lot on the line, considering that it was New Zealand versus Australia, and one guy had to win. And those things are going to happen again. He's still one of the best in the world, but when you run into a power striker like KKF and you sit in the pocket for too long, it's bad news. And that's exactly what transpired there in the co-main event, in a fight that you and I thought had a chance to be extremely exciting, and we thought that this fight
was exciting. It was exciting. It's just an exciting finish that we didn't expect.
For sure. And I was just going to say, we thought that Erceg was going to use his wrestling to dictate the fight. That was far from the case. So
yeah, no. Dan Hooker, Australia pulling off a couple of big wins. I know it didn't win in the main event.
Huge upset here.
Yeah, huge upset. Matus Gamrot, Dan Hooker. Hooker ends up getting a split decision. A really close, a really competitive fight. I thought Gamrot would have used his wrestling a little more, but I have to give credit to Dan Hooker. I was questioning if he was going to be able to have the defenses to take on Gamrot. Oh man, did he? He was ready.
Oh, he did. And I kind of teased it last week. I said this could be a potential fight of the night candidate and a potential fight of the year candidate. I think it was both.
Mm-hmm.
This was an outstanding fight.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it was. I think this was one where I had it 1 round apiece as well. I think I gave the third round to Hooker, though. I thought Hooker did a little more. I don't think the takedown Gamrot had in that round was effective compared to what Hooker was doing in that third.
That's fair. I scored it for Gamrot. I would have to go back and rewatch it again. But at first glance, watching it live, I did think Gamrot won. But I would have been okay with the decision either way. It was far from from a robbery. And I saw some people saying that online, and I think that you guys need to relook up the definition of robbery in MMA because that's not what that was.
Yeah, I get people getting a little if they felt Gamrot got robbed only because of the hometown edge, but you want to see robbery. This fight was really good. Actually, before I transition there, Zan, let's talk about Dan Hooker and what could be next. Because he threw out basically anything. He said, I'm down for anything. Title shot, Conor, contender fight, like give me anything. I don't care. Now this brings up a really interesting question because Gamrot could have been in line for at least an interim title shot, if not a full title shot. But now we've got Islam, who's hurt. And now it's only Dan Hooker and Arman in that top 5, top 6 who are coming off of wins. And Arman has talked about he doesn't want to wait till the end of the year. Till after the year is over for another fight. Do you try, considering the situation of 310? And I guess I would say 308 but that's already got Holloway to Pereira. Do you try to book Hooker versus Arman for an interim title before the year's done?
I don't think you need an interim belt because it defeats the purpose of an interim belt. Makachev has not been inactive for a year. If he had been inactive for a full year and hadn't fought, I would have been totally okay with an interim title. But a 5-round main event with no title on the line, I'm good. I'm good with that. I just think with the letter of what the interim title is supposed to do, that fight does not make sense. We're just considering that it's an injury. It's an injury in training months after a title defense. To me, an interim title being instituted doesn't make sense. Again, if it was a year of Islam not being active and whatever, and the UFC wanted to strip him, fine. But in this scenario, just following the letter of the law, I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense.
Would you at least say, if Arman wants to do it, 5-round fight night main event on one of these fight nights that's going to happen before the end of the year, and basically call it a contenders fight and not an interim title fight?
Of course, this is a perfect main event for Tampa. This is a perfect main event for China. Yeah, 100%. You want to end the year with a banger in Tampa. This is Hooker versus Arman
Hooker.
is a phenomenal fight.
And then I guess the winner would face Islam in either February or March. Well, actually, February might be stretching it. March or April.
Right, it would have to be before Ramadan. So any of those months work. Well, maybe not April, but January, February, or March. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. If they're clear to go. Okay, but we want to talk about robberies and we want to talk about bad things. I'm sorry. What was Howie smoking to put 30-27 for Tuivasa? Did he just get the fighters confused?
Howie Booth had too much time at the booth before the fight. That's what happened.
I'm sorry. Jairzinho Rosenstrike completely batters Tai Tuivasa around. Tuivasa's face is completely swollen. Yeah, I could see maybe one round, but I really had it 30-27 for Jairzinho, and I'm hearing 37-27, and I'm just waiting for the Jairzinho, and then he says Tuivasa, and I just shouted out I just shouted out, what? I put in my group chat, like I was texting with my colleagues at MMA News, and it's just like all caps WHAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAT. Like, are you kidding me? Like, Zan, I'm sorry. This is the worst scorecard I've ever heard. Like this, I don't know if this trumps 118, 110 Canelo, but this was just at that level.
Yeah, this makes Antonio Ruggiero Nogueira versus Jason Brose looks like it belongs in the Hall of Fame for bad scorecards, and that's a blast from the past too. But this is without it. I'm not gonna say it's the worst. I'd have to go back and go deeper, but this is one of the worst that I can remember where it was like, on what logical planet is tied to us winning a fight 30-27 when he was outgained essentially in every single statistical category in an MMA fight that you could possibly be outgained in. He was outgained in it. It's unbelievable. It's like when Teddy Atlas went on his famous rant where he goes, "I've had it. I'm done. I've had it. This is ridiculous. This is why I'm losing respect for the sport of boxing." That was a miniature moment of what had happened in the Rosenstrike Tuivasa fight. And no disrespect to Tuivasa, the crowd loved him. It's obviously his hometown, but when you get battered in that way by a guy who's been one of the top heavyweight contenders for several years, and he doesn't get the credit from all three judges, and literally it's dissed by one of them, a guy that I think only judged 2 fights and then was pulled in the middle of the event. Are you kidding me? This is unreal.
And I have to say, praise be to the Australian Athletic Commission, or whatever they're called, for showing some accountability and saying, yeah, we're giving you the hook here. You're not doing the co-main event. Now, granted, the co-main event never ended up needing to go to the judges, but could you imagine if Cara France versus Usyk played out the way we thought it was going to play out, and Howie Wolf was going to be one of the judges to decide that?
Oh my God. I think MMA X / formerly Twitter would be wanting to throw stuff out the window and start burning it if that happened.
We need more of this. We need more accountability here. I'm sorry.
100%, especially in international UFC. Tom, could you imagine? Could you imagine this was NSAC? We could spend a whole hour for talking about that Vegas is going back to being quote unquote corrupt again.
Well, we'll see if we get an NSAC rant tomorrow on Tough and Tough Enough. We'll see if that happens.
That's true.
But that's for then. Zain, overall grade that you want to give UFC 305? Because I'm going probably B+ range.
Be a little more generous and say A-. The main event delivered. The fight between Hooker and Gamma had sold me. The win for Carlos Paredes over the Leech, which is one of the nastiest knockouts I've seen this entire year, was phenomenal.
I am so glad. You know, I was thinking about that fight. I knew the Leech hadn't been competing for a while. Not as long as I mean, it was longer than I thought. But like Brett and Anthony were talking so much about Paredes. I know Pat has too, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go along with it. I am glad I went along with it because my God, give Carlos Paredes a ranked competition next.
For sure, Tom, you're not gonna believe this. I did a horrendous 4-8 job, okay? But the 4 fights I got right. You're not going to believe this. I had the fighter correct, the round correct, and the method correct, and that was one of them. Brady's second round KO TKO to still finish in the top 2009 apology with a horrible record, but 4 perfect outcomes for the 4. It's like, right. I must be predicting the future or something like that.
Yeah. That's insane. I'm sorry, man. That's nuts. Let's go PFL Hollywood. Briefly talk about it. So
these fights I cooked on though 8-1-1, nothing to and I did really well, almost sweep the entire board, including hitting at least part of these 2 fights correct, which I was happy about. But continue on though.
Yeah, so Impa Kasaganai has a hard-fought win over Josh Silveira, a lot closer than the first fight was, but Kasaganai gets the decision win again, and he moves on now to face Dovletsan Yagshimuradov. And hey,
your dark horse pick the entire season.
I told you he was dangerous, and he showed that against Wilkinson.
He sure did, and that was Wilkinson's first loss, even though Don Davis likes to think he's Wilkerson. His name is Wilkinson. It was his first loss since Israel Adesanya in 6 years, which is something that I totally forgot about. So to see his career resurgence has been awesome, but to lose a very tough fight like this one had to be just gut wrenching, though. So
yeah, but Dove clearly won it, and now I'm sorry to say, Zain, because I know Impa's your boy, and I like Impa too, but I think Dove might give him some problems.
So you think this is going to be a 5-round slugfest? Is what you're saying?
Yeah, this one's gonna be a slugfest that ends in a close decision, probably a split.
Well, given that we're going to be in Saudi Arabia, judging better be a little careful, like, because you know that there's probably going to be a little bit of bias considering that part of the card is going to be guys from that region. So just something to be very wary of. I'm still picking Impa. I actually think he gets a late 4th round finish. That's my way too early prediction. But I think Dove does give Impa the toughest fight of his career, and I actually think Impa survives an early an early knockdown to come back and win the fight late. So I think it'll be a good fight. I think it'll be the best light heavyweight final probably in PFL history. And I'm not just saying it because I like Impa. I like Dove too, but I just think this fight is all the makings to be one of the best fights outside of the UFC of the entire year. And then looking over this other fight, Tom, after what he did Friday night and the way he did it, I'm sorry. I like Brett Primus. I like his background, but he's going to be in for a hellacious fight if he isn't careful. I'm just going to say that.
Zen, you don't need to apologize, because I saw what Brent did to Collard, and I'm like, oh wow, that's impressive. And then I saw what Godzi did, and my jaw was on the floor, like, oh my god, okay. I'm convinced. I'm with you. I'm switching over. I'm going with Godzi.
So you're picking him to win the lightweight tournament in the $1 million. That's your early pick.
Did you see the knockdown he laid in?
I did.
I mean, I'm worried. I know Primus is a great wrestler. I don't know, man. I think he could get hit with one punch, and that could be it.
I think so too. And the only way his fight becomes awesome is if he somehow takes Godzi to the ground. That'll be very interesting. But if he stands with them, I'm a little worried. So
yeah, this was the performance. This was a star-making performance. I'm just gonna put it like that for Godzi.
For sure. And also, I know that we're on the topic of the PFL, but if you were to ask me about guys that the UFC could potentially sign in the future, he's one of them. So
yeah, absolutely. All right. Let's get into a few news topics before we do our preview. Just a few. As we kind of teased before, UFC 307 has been finalized October 5th, Salt Lake City. The main event, as I referenced before, light heavyweight title on the line, Alex Pereira against Khalil Rountree, because I guess Dana really did not want to do Pennington Pena as the co-main event, which it is. I mean, pardon me, Pennington versus Pena as the main event, because it's the co-main event, women's bantamweight title on the line. Zan, I don't know what directions I could take. I mean, it's a good card, what they've announced.
It is. It's a very good card.
It's a good card.
A lot of high-quality fights on it.
But I guess after what Kayla did to Holly Holm, I wish she would have gotten the title shot here. And Khalil Rountree, I mean, look, I get it. He ingested the wrong substance, and it was a really unfortunate thing that caused him to be forced out of a fight with Jamal Hill. But I'm sorry, coming off of what's going to be basically a suspension and getting a title shot, just that doesn't rub me the right way.
Yeah, it doesn't rub me the right way either. And before we even get into the main event, just briefly, I want to know, Tom, what are your thoughts on Julianna Pena getting a title shot after getting annihilated by Amanda Nunes at UFC 277 in July of 2022? Because to me, you just can't justify a former champion losing in the way that she did and being rewarded for it. And to me, that's exactly what we're looking at here for this co-main event. And to me, I think that's disappointing. That I feel like the UFC is only really using her for a name instead of giving it to someone who clearly deserves the next title shot at bantamweight in a division that's been stagnant essentially ever since Amanda Nunes retired.
Right. And Zan, we talked about it when Kayla Harrison got assigned days after Pennington won the title, and we said the reason that was moved on very quickly was because they saw, in our opinion, they saw Pennington's fight where she won the vacant title in January, and they were like, "Oh no, we don't have a name." And I get it. They want maybe Kayla to get one more win when Julianna Pena, she upset Amanda Nunes, and so still technically is at the top of the division. But it goes back to what we talked about weeks ago, Zan. What happens if Ketlen Vieira pulls off the upset? Then you've just killed Kayla Harrison's momentum, and now she'd be out of a title shot. Like, this is a case, Zan, of the UFC
It's a crapshoot.
not pulling the trigger.
It's a crapshoot. Is what it is. And
they should have pulled the trigger. I'm sorry.
Right, and it's almost what was I going to say? And it's almost a brutal situation to where if Pena wins, there's no way you can't do an immediate rematch between these two. And if Pennington wins, you got to hope that Harrison wins, because if Harrison doesn't win, then you don't have a legitimate fight to sell that people are going to care about. That's the issue. And this is no disrespect to Ketlen Vieira whatsoever. Ketlen Vieira is a great fighter, but he's nowhere near the star power of what Kayla Harrison is brought over from the PFL to the UFC. So no matter what happens in this scenario, the promotion ultimately loses, in my opinion. Everybody loses.
And I think this should have been swapped. It should have been Raquel versus Kayla, Pena versus Ketlen.
100%. Because
and I mean,
Pena fighting Ketlen, it actually makes sense. She's coming off of a loss. You're not rewarding her. You're not rewarding her with the title shot. You're trying to see, does she still have it after a 2-year absence, and doing this almost races in a revisionist history sort of way that Nunes even beat her in the rematch, and that's the problem.
And I know I sound hypocritical talking about this and criticizing this co-main when I've been not against Jones versus Stipe. Here's the problem: even though Stipe hasn't fought in a while, here's his resume and accomplishments. The names that he has being the only UFC heavyweight to defend the title 3 times.
That's when I can agree with you on. Yeah.
What has Julianna Pena done other than upsetting Amanda Nunes? You know what this is? This is the Sean Strickland conversation again, because outside of the win over Adesanya, what is Sean Strickland's, his best win inside? His best win's like Brendan Allen.
I would argue it's probably Cannonier, but you could
Cannonier. But my point being that the level of competition that Strickland has fought doesn't work.
Right. Kind of hitching gears over to the main event. I just want to go on a brief rant. This fight, to me, in my opinion, screams that the UFC rankings, number one, and the UFC rankings panelists don't mean shit. You know why? Because if they really wanted to make the fight that people are clamoring to see, which is Alex Pereira against the guy with the most wins at 205 pounds over the last 3 years, they would have made the fight. I am convinced that they have something against the Ankalaev fought 2 years ago that they still have not let go. That's what I think, and they will continue to do this. They will continue to do this similarly to what they did to Bilal Muhammad until they have no other choice but to give him the fight. That's what I think. They're pushing him into the corner, and the only thing they're trying to sell right now, they're trying to make you forget that the suspension from Rountree even happened. They're trying to make you forget that, number one. And they're trying to also make you remember that Khalil Rountree's won 5 fights in a row, which also means that he'll be getting a title shot after beating an old aging Anthony Smith. What does that do? It doesn't do anything.
It's the Stephen Thompson argument that I talked about with Shavkat. I mean, Zan, look, and you talk about this combined with the uncertainty about Conor and Chandler in December. I mean, Zan, they had the opportunity to do something where they had
it was in their hands.
Right. Not just that, Zan. They had an opportunity. We talked about it before. We entertained the idea of like this October 5th card being a mostly, if not all, women's MMA show where you give the women the spotlight, considering the title shot, considering Kayla Harrison, considering Carla Esparza is going to have her retirement fight on this card. And you have the uncertainty again of Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler that you could have had Alex Pereira prepare for. So now, if you lose Conor versus Chandler, you have nothing but Bilal versus Shavkat. Now, part of that might be because
and maybe Pereira, but it's only assuming that he gets out 100% healthy, or if he somehow gets upset. Because it's MMA, you never know. It's MMA.
This is Zain, to give Khalil Rountree his respect, he is a hell of a kickboxer. So is Alex Pereira. This is a kickboxing war. What happens if Khalil Rountree catches him with a super head kick?
Your whole plan of middleweight, heavyweight, light heavyweight goes to complete shit. That's what he does. Yeah, exactly. Because this is MMA, and MMA continues every single week to get in its own way. And this is the way
it's becoming boxing. It's becoming boxing.
Except we don't have mandatory challengers. That's the only thing we're missing. Because this feels like a WBA mandatory sort of main event. Does it not?
It does. And Zain, the UFC just continues to show it can't manage a schedule of events.
No, it can't. And speaking of, they're going to do 41 shows this year, and at their traditional 44, which leads me to tell you that they had too many off weeks in their mind. That's what that means. So
great. That means they're gonna have it. They're gonna have UFC every week next year. Now, aren't they?
Probably. Okay. You want to go through and tell the masses or the general public what the rest of the UFC schedule is going to look like in 2024?
Sure.
We got 14 events to go.
We have 4 months left. We've got
14 events to go.
Yeah, we have Vegas 96 this week. We've got an off week August 31st. We've got an off week August 31st. Pardon me, text came in. We have Vegas 97 September 7th. The Sphere card on the 14th. We have the 21st is an off week. The 28th, they're in Paris. The 5th is 307, like we talked about. Back-to-back weeks at the Apex then, before 308 in Abu Dhabi. November 2nd, we talked about November and December last week because we talked about the Apex. November 2nd to Edmonton. November
a very, very solid main event in Edmonton too, I might add. A very, very important fight for the women's flyweight division between Rose Namajunas and Erin Blanchfield. Huge fight.
November 9th, the last Apex card until they renovate the place. November 16th, MSG. They haven't confirmed the main event, but the John Jones is being talked about. November 23rd, going to Macau, to China, which the UFC hasn't been to China, I think, since Weili Zhang's first title win.
Yep.
So it's been 5 years, and November 30th.
Specifically, by the way, just to quickly correct you, 5 years ago was Shanghai. This is this is their first trip to Macau in 10 years.
Right, because Macau's
right.
They basically separate off.
Right.
Okay, December 7th is going to be 310. December 14th is UFC Tampa, and that's the final card for the year. There's no 21st card.
Yep. Which makes sense because we're going to have the biggest heavyweight boxing rematch of the year the following week, so of course, no need to compete there. So, and of course, no need to compete with the expanded college football playoff either. So
that's true. And I guess that's also why they're off September 21st when they have Joshua versus Dubois for the IBF title.
Right, because Dana White secretly likes Anthony Joshua and doesn't miss a single one of his fights. So there's a reason right there. So
yeah, I mean, should be good. Like I just said in the last segment, though, they're kind of screwed for December if they're going the way that they're going.
So I'm going to ask you a question because at the time that we're recording this, it's August 19, 2024. This is going to air on the anniversary of UFC 202, which is McGregor. He has two potentially rest.
That card is so fantastic.
Potentially rest in peace to a trilogy or forever, always, and then some. I have to ask you, over under the number of UFC main events that will fall out or get replaced for the remainder of the year.
We're starting from September, right? We're not counting this weekend?
Correct. Yes. Correct.
Okay, so that would be 1, 2, 3 for September, 4 for October, 4 for November, 2 for December. So 13. That's 13 main events we're talking about.
Yep.
I will say, what's the over-under? What do you set the over-under at?
Let's do an over-under of 7.5.
I'm going to go under. I think only 3 or 4.
Okay, so then that leads me to my second question. Is there going to be a shocking main event pullout that nobody is expecting over the next 2 months that people won't believe?
I don't know, because the likely ones to fall out are going to be 309 and 310, and I think people do expect Jones-Stipe to not happen or Conor Chandler to not happen.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I know we just talked about the fight, but I think Khalil Rountree is going to get injured in camp ahead of the Alex Pereira fight. And
man, you're predicting an injury.
I think we're going to see a crazy shake up to UFC 307 that I'm just going to give you a fair warning. People are not going to stand. That's for sure.
Zain, what are you talking about?
They're going to force through and they're going to move on Khalil up of UFC 308 and finally make the fight that people are excited about.
I would be happy for that. I know Dana White wouldn't be, but I would be happy with that.
So that's gonna be my one bold prediction. The other one that I'm gonna say is I think that Aaron Blanchfield falls out of the Rose Namajunas fight, and I think that Manon Farrell fights Rose in the main event for Edmonton. That's my prediction.
Oh, that would be an interesting rematch. Although I don't know if Rose is ready for a Manon rematch right now.
That's true. Even though Farrell was announced as the backup for Noche UFC 2, which he would technically still be ready, assuming she doesn't fight September 14th in a last-minute pullout situation for Alexa or Valentina. Those are the only two I can think of. I am going to hold out hope and pray to the MMA gods that 308, 309, and 310 stay intact, however they are supposed to. And I am going to go out on a limb and predict that Jones and Stipe will actually be fighting. They will walk to the cage at Madison Square Garden on November 16th to end this entire mess of who is the best heavyweight in the world and who is the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world. So,
wait, I'm sorry. I'm getting a message from Dana. Okay, I had to turn him off. He's just going on a whole 5-minute rant again about John Jones being the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world.
Okay, so you're going to go under 7.5. I'm going to go under 7.5. My final question before we get off this is, what is going to be the best remaining main event of the entire year if you had to quickly predict it?
The best? Probably Max Holloway, Ilya Tapura.
Okay, I'm gonna go a little bit more bold, and I'm gonna say that Jones Stipe actually over delivers, and it's not gonna be the washout that people are expecting it to be. I actually think that Stipe comes to competing with Jones surprisingly one of the toughest fights of his career and the toughest fight that he will ever.
Dude, can you imagine if Stipe Miocic ends up being the one to take out Jones's, undefeated record?
As someone who has Midwest bias, yours truly would be ecstatic for the next 2 weeks. That's for sure.
Okay, one last bullet because I want to keep going. Does John Jones or Stipe Miocic retire after their 309 fight?
Assuming Jones wins, I think Stipe retires, but I think Jones sticks around. I don't think he retires.
Okay.
I think he will give, in Dana White's words, I think he will give Aspinall the respect he deserves, and they will somehow, some way make the fight, assuming that Jones wins. If the UFC really wants it their way. Now, obviously, there is the outlier we're not talking about to where Aspinall could potentially step in and still fight. We obviously don't know, but I do think somewhere, some way down the line, Jones and Aspinall will eventually happen because it has to. It has to.
Yeah. let's briefly, just a little MMA media news. Ariel Helwani has made an announcement after returning from his Olympics coverage. He is leaving Vox Media. He's leaving Spotify. Unfortunately, the three-man team with him, Chuck, and Pizzi is no more. Basically said he wanted to get things done with negotiations before leaving for Paris. That did not happen. And now it's coming out that basically he is leaving Vox Media. So no more MMA Hour with him. No idea at this point if I know if the MMA Hour is even going to continue. I heard a rumor maybe New York Rick will step in as the host, but that show wouldn't be the same even without, even if it stuck around without Ariel.
I agree.
And now a rumor that came out earlier before we started recording from AJ Perez, a good friend of myself, and Nick Morgeson's, who we've had on ETB Sports before. Ariel Helwani is now rumored to be joining Yahoo Sports. Obviously, Yahoo had Kevin Iole before parting ways with him, and now apparently they're eyeing Ariel potentially.
Yeah, this is big news. I mean, obviously, you just had Ben Folks, a longtime MMA writer, interview Dana White. So that was obviously a big get for Yahoo Sports. It was their first probably major MMA get since Kevin Iole left the site that he had been heading since 2007, the MMA section of it per se. So they're trying to reestablish their brand as one of the top outlets in MMA to try to get back to that upper echelon where they were in 08, 09, 10 through about 14, 15. So that's obviously big news for Yahoo Sports. I'd be interested to see what his role or capacity is. It's unclear as to whether or not he'll be, covering just MMA or if he'll be covering other sports. He's obviously dabbled in Olympics coverage, as you just said, for CBC Gem, and also from there, you took a look at his work, for TNT Sports, formerly BT Sports, DAZN, and everything else. I think if he's going over to Yahoo Sports, it's an exclusive deal. He's only going to go with them, and I think he will be the face of Yahoo Sports combat sports coverage for years to come, if that's what he is being signed to do. I'm one of those people that genuinely respects his career. I think he's done some amazing things. He may have rubbed some people the wrong way with some of the stuff he's reported and some of the opinions he's had over the years that I think are, justified or unjustified in one way or another, however you want to look at it. But the fact of the matter is, he's the biggest name in MMA media, one of the biggest names in combat sports media, and Yahoo is lucky to have him.
Absolutely. I have nothing else that needs to be said. I think you kind of I think I've kind of agree on you on just about every single point that you mentioned about how
I am displeased. Thank you.
I'm just curious if with him going over to Yahoo, if they'll let him, dabble in a couple things. Like he dabbled in it with the NBA while with ESPN.
I just feel like Yahoo is too big of an outlet to where they would want him to go off doing other things. But I could be wrong. Obviously, the space is, from what I do as a freelancer, I work for multiple places and it's worked for me. He's obviously way more established than I'll ever be at this point in my career, but working for multiple places is the new norm. Will he continue to do that? That remains.
I don't think so. I think it's an exclusivity deal, like you said. I'm just curious if they'll let him dabble every now and again. Now, that does bring us over, I think, Zain, to the Vox side of things, because he's not the only recent departure for Vox Media. You mentioned Conor just recently announced he's no longer going to be with Vox.
Yeah. So my theory on that is I think he's bringing. This is my theory. If he wants to continue the MMA Hour as his own show, I think he could potentially be bringing some of those guys over, and Conor could end up being one of them to where he sticks with Ariel, or because he's doing so much stuff for NFL and college football content, he just stick to just being an X's and O's guy and doesn't dabble in MMA unless he's doing it more as like a fan-centric thing. So you never know. But his whole staple on the show was him being that producer that was quick-witted, witty, and relatable to the fans on X, and I think that's what people will miss about him the most, especially the watch parties with Mike Heck. Those things were gold content for MMA fighting. It'll be
and those are being stopped now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I think, Zan, it's one of two things. Like you mentioned, number one, that Ariel's just bringing over a bunch of guys, or just Conor, in which, to try to replicate some of what they had over at MMA Fighting, and maybe it's both, but the other thing, secondly, or maybe there's a little trouble at Vox Media that we don't know about.
It's very true. And then for Spotify, they obviously, built up the Ringer MMA section pretty well. It'll be interesting to see if and will they continue MMA coverage, because obviously Chuck Mandinol and PT Carroll did tremendous work on those Spotify live post show and pre-show.
I hope those two. Sorry, Zan. I hope those two continue to do their thing, or they find another person to do it with. Like
I hope
Chuck,
so too.
PT, and Ariel had such good chemistry, and I think Chuck and PT can have good chemistry on their own too.
I hope so too. With the amount of chaos that's going on in MMA media, with people who are switching and turning and potentially losing their jobs, it's a very wild space. And when you have the biggest MMA media personality on the planet, moving to a potential new home in Yahoo Sports, it's going to shake up the industry. A watch. It's like it did in 2019, with several different other acquisitions, which could be a whole different story in itself. But this is huge news. It'll be interesting to see what Ariel does from here, and I'm excited to see the next chapter of a career where he's essentially done everything he's ever wanted to do at every place he's ever wanted to do it at. So,
definitely. All right, quickly, let's talk about this weekend's cards a little bit. We got PFL in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. We got two more divisions that have to determine their championship matchups. Featherweight, we have our main event this weekend on Friday. It's Brendan Loughnane looking to become a two-time featherweight champion. But first, to get to this year's title fight, he's got to go through Kai Kamaka III in a fight that should be such a banger. And then you got another banger earlier in the night when Gabriel Braga looks to get back to the championship round when he takes on Timur Khizriev.
Yeah, these are two great fights. Just to keep it really brief, because I know we're running a little bit over this week, a lot of news and notes to get through. So thank you again for bearing with us. This is easily one of the most packed editions in the history of this show, as it's vastly approaching 100 episodes. So thank you guys for bearing with us this week. We really appreciate it. To keep it very brief, this fight is going to be all about, meaning Loughnane Kamaka III is going to be all about whose gas tank can last a little bit longer. I will take Loughnane here. He's still on a prove you wrong tour ever since being snubbed from the UFC 5 years ago. He's been a staple of the PFL for a long, long time. I just think he's better everywhere. I love him by decision, and I also like Braga to get back to the championship, finishing Khizriev by TKO in the second round. What do you think?
I think Loughnane versus Kamaka is going to end up being a war. And I'm going to lean with you. I think Lougnane's experience is going to get him the nod. Braga versus Khizriev is a little tough. This one is a bit of a coin flip on my book. I think I kind of want to go with Khizriev here.
Okay, any particular rationale as to why?
I just not 100% certain if Braga is going to have, when we talk about the whole round package, I'm not sure if he's going to be able to handle the kind of wrestling, the kind of grappling that Khizriev has. I mean, I know he's not a finisher, Khizriev, but I think he's got, I'll just put it bluntly, Zan, it's a Dagestani fighter training out a dog fighter. And you combine that with his American top team experience. I mean, and I think he's won. Did he win? Let me check my book. Yeah, he has won an ACA before. I kind of want to go with Khizriev in this one. I think his grappling is going to be a little too much for Braga to handle.
Should be two good fights either way. I've been lucky enough to see a few of these guys in person earlier in the year when the PFL was in Chicago, and they were all very impressive. And these are the matchups that I think we were all kind of expecting once the playoff standings were officially decided. And it's good to see that this is what the matchups are. And I'm sure you'd probably agree. So,
absolutely. Going over to welterweight, you got Magomed Umaladov taking on Neiman Gracie in the I believe that's the co-main. Yeah, that is the co-main event. And then opening up the main card is going to be Shamil Musayev taking on Murad Ramazanov, which I believe that one is actually a rematch. Yeah, Musayev had that brutal knockout of Ramazanov, I think in June. Neiman Gracie actually was the number 5 seed at welterweight. However, unfortunately, Don Match suffered an injury weeks ago. And so as a result, Gracie is filling in for Match, which is disappointing because I thought Don Match had, a respectable run that he was making with the PFL right now. But unfortunately, we move on. Yeah, look, I like Neiman as a fighter, Zan.
Yep.
But
just to clarify, you were right. It was back in June, the night before UFC 303. You were exactly right.
So I just want to clarify. I like Neiman as a fighter. I just don't know if he has the top experience, if you know what I mean. Like every time he seems to fight for big contender fight or some sort of title shot, like he had against Rory in 2019, he always falls short. I think Umaladov Zen is on a tear and he is hungry and he wants to get to a championship fight. And I think he has the capability of doing that.
I do too. I'm going to pick him by a pretty lopsided decision. I think he wins on 2 out of the 3 judges' scorecards, and I like Musayev to finish Ramazanov again. I just think it's too quick of a turnaround. I'm seeing these guys fight relatively recently. I think it's the most bad news to where if Ramazanov doesn't change his game plan, it could be a short night again. So
for sure, complete agreement with you. I think Musayev finishes him again. What did we see? That was in June. This is August. What did we see back then? But we may not see this time around.
Less than not just June to August, but less than 2 months ago. Late
June.
Yeah, late. Yep, exactly.
Main event for Vegas 96. This meanwhile. Oh, hold on. Apex. We don't have many. I can't do that too many more times now. You got Jared Cannonier taking on Kyle Barrio. I like Kyle, but I think this is too much too quick. Cannonier just has a lot of experience on him. Been in the main event scene. I'm gonna go Cannonier with the decision win.
100% in agree. Even not too much else to add, and Kyle's gonna have to hope that he finishes him before the championship rounds, because if it goes to the championship rounds, I think that experience is going to play a factor. And yeah, I let Cannonier this weekend as well to win a hard-fought unanimous decision, probably 49-46 on 2 of the judges' scorecards, with 148-47 sprinkled in, which goes to my prediction that I forget, but I think I know these Nevada judges well enough by now to know where their heads are at. So hopefully I'm right. But the only way Bahio wins is some sort of wacky finish within the first 15 minutes, though. That's what I think.
I think you and I are just on the same page. We are on the same wavelength with this Vegas main event.
100%. And you can catch the rest of our UFC Vegas 96 card lineup this weekend when we release the whole bout order and all of our predictions a couple of hours before the first prelim. Again, it's a traditional pay-per-view start time. We got the prelim starting around, I think, 7 p.m. Eastern, with the main card starting at 10 p.m. Eastern. The traditional pay-per-view start all ESPN for the entire card. It's one of the last times I'll be able to say it before college football, but I just going to do it for another edition of the MMA Outsiders. What's up?
One more thing we forgot. We know the Tough Finale fights are this weekend. We are not going to give you those here. You have to go to the edition of Tough Enough that is premiering tonight, this Tuesday the 20th at 11:05 p.m. Eastern. That's going to go out across our social medias and here on the ETV network to get our thoughts on and predictions on the tough fights. You got to watch Tough Enough for that, baby.
100%. And so tune in to the final official edition of Tough Enough, where we can get those predictions for the finale fights. We'll have a full recap of those next week on a special style show. More announcements to come on that. But before we get out of here, just be sure to please like and subscribe to the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. Would greatly be appreciated, as we just eclipsed over 840 subscribers. So the climb to 1,000 continues. Again, youtube.com/ETB Network. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. That way it's in the algorithm every single time you open YouTube. Of course, you can listen to the show wherever you get your podcasts, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Acast, and so much more, including YouTube Premium if you have that feature available at your disposal. Just wanted to also give one quick final shout out to our friends over at Playback who sponsor every single show, including every episode of the MMA Outsiders. We cannot do this without all of you and all of your support. For myself, that's Tom Albano to my left. We will see you guys with. We hope you have a wonderful weekend. We hope you enjoy the fights on Friday from Washington, D.C., and of course, the fights on Saturday from Las Vegas. Before we get out of here, though, we just wanted to remind you to be Joe Pyfer and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Or be Joe Pyfer, and because Alex Pereira just got announced for a fight, Jama,
absolutely.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Have a good one.